The wind didn't whisper in hollow ridge. It screamed like a widow mourning her dead. It was the kind of cold that bit straight through leather and wool, the kind that turned creeks into glass ribbons and cattle into stiff silhouettes along the edge of the bluffs. Snow clung to the black pines like ash. The sky was a pale bruise, too tired for sunlight, but heavy with the weight of coming weather. Jack Carver stood alone on the porch of his ranch house, hat low, coat collar high, a Henry rifle resting lazy in the crook of his arm. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He hadn't for years. The land stretched around him in every direction, wild and wide and brutally quiet. 100 acres of nothing but silence and memory. It was 1865, and the war was over, but no one had told the West. Behind Jack, the house creaked softly in the wind, the wood swollen from years of rain and grief. The paint had peeled away, the porch boards bowed and splintered, but he didn't care. He kept the place upright enough to keep the cold out and the wolves off his horses. That was all that mattered. He had once dreamed of more. A family, a legacy, warmth that lingered in laughter and the smell of bread cooling on the windowsill. But those dreams were buried now beneath 2 weathered crosses on the hill behind the barn. His wife, Maria. His daughter, Elena. Gone 6 winters ago. Raiders, they said. Apache, the others whispered. But Jack had seen enough blood to know the truth didn't matter. Nothing brought them back. He'd returned from the war only to find what he fought for stolen. So he stayed, fenced his land, raised his horses, fixed what broke, and ignored what couldn't be fixed. No one visited. He made sure of that. Then came the knock. It was faint, a hesitant rapping, barely audible over the wind and the rattle of the storm shutters. Jack froze. He hadn't heard a knock in nearly 4 years. The last had been a neighbor begging for help after a flood. He'd sent the man away with a broken hand and a warning not to return. The knock came again. 3 short taps. A pause. Then 2 more. Jack moved silently, rifle ready. He stepped down from the porch and angled toward the door, boots crunching snow. His breath plumed in front of him, slow and steady. Whoever it was hadn't come by horse. No tracks. No wagon. Just small indentations barely visible in the drifting powder. He flung open the door. 10 pairs of eyes stared back at him. Children. Girls. Apache. They were soaked to the skin, shivering in threadbare shawls and torn cotton. Their cheeks were wind-chapped, their hair matted with frost and leaves. The oldest stood at the front, maybe 15, eyes like carved obsidian, wide with fear and something else, something like defiance. Jack lowered his rifle an inch. The girl took a step forward, holding up a hand. "No harm," she said, her accent thick, the words careful. "Please, shelter." Jack didn't move. He counted them, 10. The youngest couldn't have been more than 6. One limped. Another clutched a bundle of cloth to her chest. A doll, maybe. Jack's stomach twisted. "What happened?" he asked. The girl blinked. "Bad men. Hunting." He felt the prickle of something cold and old crawl up his spine. "Turn around," he said. His voice was low, harsh. "Go back where you came from." The girl didn't flinch. The others shifted behind her, unsure. One began to cry, softly. Another coughed, a wet, rattling sound that spoke of infection and too many nights in the open. The girl didn't beg. She didn't plead. She simply stood there, eyes fixed on his. "Please," she repeated. "We will leave soon. Just warm." Jack slammed the door. The wind howled louder. It pressed against the walls like a living thing. He leaned his forehead against the doorframe, fingers tight on the rifle stock. Every instinct screamed at him to stay closed, to shut it all out. He had nothing left to give. The world had taken everything and left him bones. But still, the knock had come, and the faces so much like Elena's. He turned. There was no fire in the stove yet. The coals had long gone cold. He hadn't lit it today, hadn't needed to. But now he found himself striking flint, stacking dry wood, coaxing flame from tinder like his life depended on it. When he opened the door again, they were still there, curled in on each other, snow in their lashes, silent. He stepped aside, said nothing. They filed in slowly, unsure. One paused and looked up at him, maybe 7 years old, with a face too thin for her age and eyes too old. She clutched the doll tighter. Jack looked away. Inside, they gathered near the stove, fingers outstretched. He tossed 2 extra logs in, watched the flames climb higher. The girls didn't speak. The oldest stood guard between them and him, eyes tracking his every move. He went to the kitchen, pulled what he had, salt pork, beans, cornmeal. Not enough for 11, but enough for now. He poured water into a pot, set it over the fire. As it began to steam, the smell drew their heads up. Hope moved subtly across the group, a twitch of lips, a glance exchanged. The girl, who had spoken, stepped forward again. "I am Naeli," she said. He nodded once. "Jack." She waited. When he said nothing else, she returned to her sisters. Night fell hard. The storm deepened. Jack gave up his bed and slept in the barn, surrounded by horses and silence. He couldn't sleep. His mind kept circling that moment, the girl's voice, the way they hadn't begged, the way they'd waited in the cold, willing to die with dignity. Brave, desperate, hunted. He rose before dawn. In the dim morning light, he checked the perimeter. Found tracks, booted heavy. For riders, maybe 5, headed north to south. Passed by his land. Stop a mile out. Turn back. Looking. Hunting. He returned to the house, coat stiff with frost. Inside, the girls were still asleep, curled near the stove like kittens. The warmth had returned color to their faces. One of them murmured in her sleep, and Jack froze. The voice was high, sweet, childlike, so much like his daughter's. He stepped outside again, heart pounding. In the woodshed, he pulled out the old crate. It had been Maria's, packed with herbs, salves, linen. He hadn't touched it since the day he buried her. His hands shook as he opened it. There was a salve for infection. Still good. He packed bandages, too, and thread. Inside, he checked the wounded girl's leg. A jagged gash, swollen and angry. Naeli flinched as he touched it. "Bad," she said. "From fence." He said nothing. Cleaned the wound. Applied the salve. Wrapped it tight. The girl whimpered but didn't cry. Naeli met his eyes. "Why help?" He didn't answer. Just pulled the blanket tighter over the girl. Later that morning, the youngest approached him. She carried the doll in both hands. It was filthy, stuffing poking from the side, one eye missing. She held it out to him. He blinked. "What?" She smiled. A missing tooth gave the smile a crooked charm. "You fix." He almost laughed. "Almost. I ain't no doctor." The girl pressed it into his hands. He sighed and sat by the fire, needle and thread in hand. He worked quietly, pretending his fingers weren't trembling. That night, they ate together. Corn cakes, watered beans. The girls shared stories in their language, voices rising and falling like birdsong. He didn't understand a word, but he didn't need to. He sat on the floor beside the stove, watching them. Something loosened in his chest. Not joy, not peace, just less pain. He woke to the sound of a cry. Naeli was at the window, breath fogging the glass. Jack grabbed his rifle. Moved beside her. "They come," she whispered. He looked. Distant movement. 3 riders, cresting the far ridge. Watching. Jack stepped outside, rifle in hand. They didn't approach, just sat on their horses, staring, then turned and vanished into the trees. Jack lowered the rifle slowly. They'd be back. Inside, the girls were quiet now. Fear lay heavy in the air. He spoke. "They'll come again." Naeli nodded. "We go." Jack hesitated, looked around the room, his house, his silence, his pain. "No," he said. "They come here. They'll find more than they bargained for." She tilted her head. "You fight?" "I fought before you were born." A pause. "You fight now?" He met her eyes. "Yes." That night, he checked the fences, reset the snares, repaired the second rifle, readied the horses. The girls didn't speak much, but they watched him. And for the first time in 6 years, Jack Carver felt a purpose that didn't come from rage or regret. He watched them sleep again. One little girl had curled up with a mended doll, arms wrapped tight, lips pressed to its fraying cloth. She smiled in her sleep. Jack turned away, eyes burning. He thought he'd buried his heart. Turns out, it had just taken 10 small hands to dig it up. By morning, the snow had stopped falling, but a deeper cold settled into the bones of the land, the kind that snapped tree limbs and froze water solid inside the troughs. Jack Carver stood outside with a steaming cup of coffee in his gloved hands, his breath curling into the pale air. The sun hadn't yet broken the edge of the earth, and the horizon glowed with a hard, amber line that promised little warmth. The girls were stirring. He could hear them through the window, soft footsteps, a murmur of voices, the occasional cough. They moved like shadows now, quieter than any children had a right to be, and Jack noticed how they always stayed close to each other like horses in a storm. Even when frightened, they didn't scatter. They closed ranks. Nayeli emerged last. She stepped outside with a slow, deliberate pace, her shawl pulled tight across her narrow shoulders. Her eyes found Jack's, and she stood there a moment before speaking. "Thank you," she said simply. Jack gave a short nod. The coffee was bitter and strong, just the way he liked it. He sipped. "They sleep warm." She glanced back at the window. "Yes." He gestured with his chin toward the corral. "Feeding time. I'll show you." She followed him without another word. In the barn, Jack handed her a pitchfork, then demonstrated. She watched carefully, mimicked his movements. There was a quiet efficiency to her. She learned fast and asked no questions unless she had to. Most children would have whined about the cold or the smell. Nayeli didn't even flinch when the mule spat at her. Jack found himself respecting her, not like a child, but like someone who'd been carved by survival into something older than her years. Later that afternoon, he walked the perimeter again, scanning the tree line. Something felt off, too quiet. The birds were gone. Even the wind had stilled. He found the tracks half a mile from the eastern fence. Boot prints. 5 sets. Wide apart. Heavy. Men on foot, possibly flanking the property. One set led farther south toward the ravine, as though someone had circled to watch from above. Jack knelt and touched the disturbed snow. Fresh, maybe 3 hours old. He stood and followed the trail to a large cottonwood. There, carved into the bark, was a crude mark, a jagged arrow pointing toward the ranch. They were watching. He returned, face grim. Nayeli met him at the door, her eyes narrowing when she saw his expression. "They're close," he said. "We need to talk." Inside, he cleared the table, spread out a rough map of the territory drawn in charcoal. He placed a knife to mark their position. "Who are they?" he asked. Nayeli didn't answer at first. She sat, her fingers resting lightly on the table's edge. The other girls clustered in the next room, silent and alert. "White man," she said finally. "Bad. Trade girls for silver. Mine camp." Jack's hand tightened around the mug. "You escaped." Nayeli nodded once. "We ran 2 nights. Through cold. Hid in trees." "You said men. How many?" 7 when we run. Maybe more now. Maybe they get help." Jack sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "You're sure they'll follow?" "They do not forget." That night he didn't sleep. He reinforced the windows with planks, pulled the extra rifles from the chest beneath the bed, his old Henry, a double-barrel scattergun, and a Navy Colt. Ammunition was low. He counted every round. Just before dawn, he heard the horses scream. He bolted upright, grabbing the rifle and crossing the cabin in 3 strides. Nayeli was already up, eyes wide in the low light. "Stay inside," he ordered. He stepped out into the biting cold. The corral gate swung open, broken. One horse was down, its flank torn open. Blood steamed in the snow. Another had bolted. Jack crouched low, scanning the ridge. Then came the first shot. It cracked through the stillness like a whip. Splinters exploded from the porch post inches from his head. He dove behind a water trough, heart thundering, rifle raised. Movement. 2 shapes darted between the trees on the hill. Muzzle flash. Another shot. Jack returned fire, once, twice, quick, controlled. One man dropped, tumbling awkwardly down the slope. The other vanished. Inside the cabin, a girl screamed. Jack moved fast, low. He reached the front door, burst inside. The youngest had been cut by flying glass, but was otherwise safe. He dropped to a crouch, back to the wall, listening. Footsteps on the porch. He raised the Henry, breath steady. A boot crossed the threshold. Jack fired. The body slammed backward with a grunt, thudding against the frozen earth. Another shot rang out from the trees. He ducked instinctively. The bullet punched through the doorframe, spraying wood. Nayeli dragged the injured girl behind the hearth, blood soaking through the linen at her leg. Jack tossed her the revolver. "You know how to use it?" She nodded once, then took position behind the overturned table. It was a siege. By midday, 3 men were dead outside the cabin. One of them still twitched when Jack stepped out and delivered a final shot to the chest. No mercy left in his bones. But there were more. Jack could feel it. That evening, he and Nayeli dragged the bodies into the woods and buried them shallow. He found a tattoo on one man's arm, an X with 2 bars beneath. "Slaver's mark. They ain't gonna quit," he muttered. "Not while they think there's silver to be made." "Then we go?" Nayeli asked. He stared at the horizon. The clouds were rolling back in heavy with new snow. "There's an outpost," he said. "Missionary camp 4 days south. You'll be safer there." She didn't answer. He looked down at her, seeing for the first time the raw edge of exhaustion behind her guarded expression. "We'll leave at dawn." They traveled light. 1 pack mule, 1 remaining horse. Jack carried both rifles, and Nayeli kept the Colt hidden under her coat. The girls took turns riding and walking. The wounded one, Aya, was strapped gently across the horse with layers of cloth to keep her warm. The wilderness was unforgiving. The first day, they crossed frozen rivers and twisted brushland, following an old trapping trail. Jack kept them moving steadily, always checking their back trail. On the second night, they camped in a ravine. The fire was small, shielded by a ring of stones. Jack sat apart, keeping watch. Nayeli approached him, silent. "You've done this before," she said. He stared into the flames. "Too many times." "Why help us?" He didn't answer right away. "Because I didn't help before," he said finally. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. He told her about Maria, then about Elena, about how he came home to a grave and a bloodstained floor. She listened without blinking. "I don't want to care again," he said, quietly. "But you made me." The next morning, they found one of Hawkland's men, caught in a bear trap Jack had set years ago and forgotten. The man was dead, face frozen into a rictus of agony. He'd bled out in the snow alone. Jack took his revolver and ammo. "They're closer than we thought." That night, wolves howled. The firewood was damp. Jack kept the girls close, his rifle never leaving his lap. The third day, the terrain turned worse. Sharp inclines, icy paths. At one point, the mule slipped and tumbled into a ditch, taking half their supplies with it. Jack cursed and kicked snow into the trees, his hands shaking. That evening, one of the girls, Maru, barely 9, tugged his coat. "Don't be mad," she said simply. "We're okay." He crouched beside her, unsure what to say. Then she hugged him. He didn't hug back. Not at first. The fourth day dawned gray and brittle. Jack's legs ached. The girls were pale, silent. Aya's fever was climbing. The trail narrowed between 2 cliffs, and then a shot rang out. Jack dove to the side, pushing the children down. A second shot struck rock, near his head. From above. Ambush. He grabbed Nayeli's arm. "Take the girls, run for those trees." "I stay," she snapped. "No, now." She didn't move. Another shot. It hit the horse, crumpled it mid-step. Jack took aim and fired once into the cliffs. Then again. A scream answered back. "Go." This time Nayeli obeyed. Jack ran in the opposite direction, drawing fire away from the others. Bullets sparked off rock around him. He climbed the slope fast, ducking low, using the trees for cover. He reached the top, found a man reloading behind a boulder. Jack fired. The man fell back, blood blooming across his chest. He spun, scanned. Nothing moved. The ambush had failed, but barely. When he returned to the grove where the girls had hidden, he found them huddled together. Nayeli was crouched low, gun still in her hand. She looked up, breathing hard. "You're hit." He looked down. His side burned. "Grazed," he muttered. She pulled him into a seated position and tore a strip from her own shawl, pressing it to the wound. "You're lucky," she said. "Luck's just God flipping a coin," he replied. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, the missionary outpost appeared like a ghost rising from the pines, white clapboard buildings, smoke from chimneys, and the sound of a bell ringing through the trees. They'd made it. Jack nearly collapsed when Reverend Billings opened the gate. Lydia, the preacher's wife, rushed to them. The girls were ushered inside, wrapped in warm blankets, hot broth, clean water. Jack sat on the steps, watching it all happen. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt something else. A slow, steady ache behind his ribs, like something had taken root there. Naeli came out last. She sat beside him, not saying anything. "You're safe now," Jack said. "We all are," she replied. He looked at her, the lines on her young face, the tired weight of her eyes. "I should go." "Why?" He opened his mouth, closed it, because staying would mean something's changed. She didn't push. She just nodded, once. Jack stood. Behind him, the girls played quietly in the yard wrapped in quilts. The sound of their laughter was faint, but it reached him all the same. And for the first time in 6 years, Jack Carver didn't feel like a ghost. He felt alive, barely, bruised, bleeding, but alive. He didn't look back. Not yet, but part of him wanted to. The snow had begun to melt by the time Jack Carver left the outpost. Days had passed, maybe a week. He hadn't kept count. He'd mended enough to ride, if not comfortably, then at least with purpose. His side still ached where the bullet had torn flesh, and his ribs throbbed when he drew a full breath. But that was all right. He welcomed the pain. It was something to hold on to, something to remind him he was still here. The Reverend and his wife had pleaded for him to stay, offered him a room, warm meals, a steady roof. The girls had cried, quietly, respectfully, but Jack had seen it in their eyes. They didn't want him to go. Not really. Neither did he. But Hawkland wasn't dead, and a man like that wouldn't let go of a grudge, not when there was coin on the line. Slavers were like wolves, shoot one and the pack gets hungrier. He needed to end it, not for vengeance, for peace. So he rode north, back toward the ranch, back toward where it all began. The land had changed, or maybe he had. What once felt like exile now seemed familiar, even welcome. The twisted trees, the skeletal remains of his corral, the blackened earth where the fire pit had been. It all spoke to him in silence. He arrived at sundown. The house was still standing. Barely. Doors broken. Windows smashed. Blood, long dried, marked the porch and the snow beyond. His own blood. Theirs. He stood there a while, reins loose in his fingers, the wind pulling at his coat like a child begging him to stay. Inside, he cleaned, repaired what he could, piled wood in the hearth, and lit a fire with the stubborn hands of a man relearning life. He ate beans from a tin, slept with a rifle across his chest. 2 days passed. Then at dawn, the horizon broke with riders. 6 of them. Jack was ready. He'd spent the nights preparing, laying traps along the old fence line, stringing wire and oil lanterns between trees, rigging the cave behind the barn with the last of his powder. He'd taken lessons from war and lost both. Now he meant to teach. The riders approached with no caution. They thought him gone. Dead, maybe. Fled like a coward. They moved like scavengers, boots heavy, rifles slung casual over shoulders. Hawkland rode in front, wide-shouldered, wolfish, with a scar down his jaw and a look in his eyes that said he'd killed more than his share and felt nothing of it. Jack watched from the ridge above, hidden by pine. He held the Henry steady breath low, slow, patient. The first man entered the barn. The second followed. Jack lit the fuse. The explosion tore through the still morning air like thunder cracking from heaven. Flame and smoke burst outward in a bloom of orange and gray. The horses screamed. One of the men flew backward in pieces, his limbs cartwheeling through the air. Chaos erupted. Jack moved. He slid down the ridge and took the first shot mid-run, clean through the neck of a man trying to draw his weapon. The body dropped like wet cloth. Another turned to fire. Jack ducked, rolled, fired again. Missed. He took cover behind the water trough as bullets splintered the wood above him. Two more men circled wide, shouting to one another in rough Spanish. Jack gritted his teeth and rose. Shot once, twice. The nearest man spun, clutching his side, screaming. The last dove for cover behind the wagon. Then came the voice. Rough, loud. Carver. Jack knew it before he looked. Hawklen. He stood in the clearing now, untouched by the fire, rifle in hand, coat billowing like a preacher's robe in the wind. You're alone, he called. You should have stayed gone. Jack stepped from cover, rifle raised but not yet fired. Not alone, he said quietly. Hawklen tilted his head. Don't see no cavalry. Jack nodded toward the woods. And there, from the tree line, stepped Naeli. She held the Colt like it belonged to her. Behind her, two of the missionaries' ranch hands, older men, quiet, loyal, flanked her with rifles of their own. Hawklen laughed once. You brought children and preachers to a gunfight. Jack didn't reply, because the girl behind Hawklen, Aya, had slipped from the trees too. She was small, quiet, fast. She slit the final man's throat before he even turned. Now it was just Hawklen. Jack lowered his rifle. This is between us, he said. Hawklen sneered. You think you're righteous? Huh? Think the war made you a man? I was killing kids before you even picked up a gun. Jack stepped forward. It ain't about war. It's about what comes after. Hawklen raised his rifle. Jack moved first. One shot. Two heart stopped. Jack staggered. The bullet had struck him just below the ribs. He dropped to one knee, blood seeping through his coat. Hawklen stood for another heartbeat, then stumbled backward. His eyes glazed, blood pouring from a hole in his chest. He collapsed into the snow, mouth still twitching as though trying to form one last curse. Then nothing. The silence returned. Jack fell. Naeli ran to him. Her hands pressed against his side, trying to slow the bleeding. You can't die, she said. Her voice broke for the first time. Jack managed to smile. I ain't dying today. He woke 3 days later in the outpost. The room was warm, filled with the smell of sage and wood smoke. His side burned. Lydia sat beside him, knitting. The fire crackled gently. You're a damn fool, she said without looking up. Jack grunted. He dead. Dead as they come. He closed his eyes, relief sinking into him like water into sand. A week passed. He walked with a limp now. Permanent, probably. But he walked. The girls were thriving. Healthy. Smiling. Maru had started humming again. The littlest one, Saki, told stories in broken English, embellishing everything with wild gestures. Naeli rode every morning. She'd taken to ranching like it was in her blood. Reverend Billings offered to find homes for all of them. Only 2 left. The rest stayed. Jack built a new house that summer. The old one he let fall, left it behind like a shed skin. He used fresh pine, white oak for the frame. The girls helped where they could, fetching nails, holding beams steady. Naeli stained the wood dark, said it reminded her of her mother's hair. By autumn, the ranch was alive again. Not quiet, not broken. Alive. Jack stood beside the grave markers one evening. The wind was gentle for once, warm with the scent of earth and smoke. He'd placed a small wooden doll on Elena's stone. Naeli had carved it herself. I thought I buried it, he said aloud. Behind him, Naeli's voice came softly. Buried what? He smiled. My heart. She said nothing for a long moment. Then, sometimes the land gives it back. He nodded. As the sun dropped below the hills, casting gold across the fields, Jack Carver turned from the graves and walked toward the sound of laughter, his boots crunching earth, not snow. His rifle hung easy on his shoulder. His limp didn't slow him, and the frontier, harsh and hollow no more, stretched before him like a second chance. So, what do we take from this tale? That even in a land born of loss and silence, hearts can still be found. That family is not always born. It is sometimes fought for, bled for, and chosen when all else is gone. That the West, in all its blood and grit and fire, has a way of remaking men, not by what they kill, but by what they choose to protect. If this story stirred something in you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in comments. Sometimes a story is all it takes to dig up what we thought was gone for good. Winter returned quicker than expected. It came howling down from the north in early October, bending trees and silencing the land. The snow was thin but bitter, clinging to fence posts and window panes like old ghosts. Jack Carver felt it in his bones before he saw it, before the clouds thickened, before the first flakes kissed the porch rail. He stood at the edge's land that morning, boot heels sunk in frost. A crow wheeled above the barn, letting out a cry that sounded too much like a warning. Something was wrong. Naeli knew it too. She didn't say anything as she hauled buckets of feed from the stable, but her eyes, dark, sharp, never drifted far from the tree line. Even the horses had gone quiet, shifting nervously as if they too sensed an unease rolling in beneath the snow. They hadn't had trouble since Hawkland fell. 7 months of peace. But peace, Jack had learned, never came without a price. And it never stayed long. That night, as the fire crackled and the girls took turns playing a tune on the old harmonica Jack had unearthed from a forgotten trunk, Naeli leaned closer. "There's a rider," she said softly, so the little ones wouldn't hear. Jack nodded. "Where?" "Near the ridge. Alone. Been circling." His jaw tightened. He stood, grabbed his rifle, and stepped onto the porch. The wind bit hard, snapping his coat around him. His eyes scanned the dark, adjusting. The moon spilled silver over the land in patches, casting long shadows through the crooked fence posts. Nothing moved. Then just a flicker. A shape, horse and rider, vanished into the trees like smoke. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the stove, boots on, rifle within reach. Old habits, carved too deep to lose. The girls slept huddled together in the loft, and he could hear their soft breathing through the thin floorboards. By dawn, hoof prints circled the property. Fresh, deliberate. Jack followed them for a mile before they disappeared into rocky terrain. Whoever it was, they knew how to ride without being caught. When he returned, Naeli was waiting at the gate. "They're watching," she said. "Yeah," Jack replied. "And I'm damn tired of being watched." That night, he dug up the last of the powder tins he'd buried beneath the chicken coop after the Hawkland fight. It wasn't much, but enough. He'd hoped never to touch it again. Hope, like peace, was a fool's luxury. By the third day, more signs appeared: cut fences, boot prints by the creek, a pile of rocks arranged in the shape of a cross not 50 yards from the barn. That night, the horses were spooked. One kicked down a stall and bolted into the dark. When Jack found the carcass the next morning, the hide had been peeled from its face. A message. He stood over the broken animal, snow swirling around his boots, his face stone. "They want us scared," Naeli said, staring at the exposed bone. Jack didn't respond. He was already building the plan in his head. That night, the girls were sent to the mission under escort. 2 days' ride, safer than staying. Jack gave them blankets, food, and strict instructions. No stopping, no turning back. Naeli didn't want to go. Her jaw clenched when he ordered her leave. "This is my fight, too," she said. "I know it is," Jack said, his voice quiet. "But you fight it by living." Her eyes brimmed, but she said no more. She mounted the horse, glanced back only once. Jack watched until she disappeared behind the ridge. Then he got to work. He set traps, rewired the lanterns, pulled the old revolvers from the cellar, and loaded every chamber by lantern light. The snow fell heavy that night, covering the land like a burial cloth. It was quiet, too quiet, until it wasn't. The first shot came at midnight, shattered the barn window. Jack ducked behind the doorway, rifle raised. He couldn't see them, just the flare of their muzzle flashes from the tree line. 5, maybe 6. He waited. Another shot. Then silence. He listened. Crunching snow. Footsteps. Close. He moved fast, out the back, low through the brush. Circled wide. Caught sight of 2 figures creeping toward the porch, rifles raised. He aimed. 1 shot. The man collapsed without a sound. The second turned too late. Jack was already on him, driving the butt of the rifle into his skull. The man dropped, twitching in the snow. He crouched, hard hammering. Then the sound of splintering wood. They were inside. Jack ran. The cabin was lit by firelight and blood. One of the men had kicked over the stove, sending sparks across the floor. Another tore open cabinets, searching. Jack burst in through the side door. One shot dropped the man at the hearth. The other turned and fired. Pain seared through Jack's shoulder. He fired back. Missed. The man charged. They collided like wolves, grappling, fists flying, blood mixing with soot and snow. Jack slammed the man's head into the table once, twice, then again until the wood cracked. Silence returned. Jack staggered back, bleeding, but alive. He dragged the bodies outside, dumped them in the snow. His arm hung useless. The blood wouldn't stop. He knew more would come. It wasn't over. He collapsed by the hearth, the flames hissing as melted snow dripped from his boots. Dawn bled across the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. He didn't hear the horses approach, not until boots thudded on the porch. He grabbed the rifle, aimed, then froze. Naeli stood there. Behind her, Reverend Billings and 2 scouts. She rushed to him, her eyes full of fire and fear. "I told you to run," he whispered. "We did," she said, dropping to her knees beside him. "Then we turned back." He tried to smile. Couldn't. She helped him to his feet. Outside, the land lay quiet once more. Bodies in the snow. Smoke rising from the broken stovepipe. Jack looked at the wreckage of the place he'd built. Then at Naeli. "They'll keep coming," he said. "Then we keep fighting." "No," he said. "We rebuild. We make it stronger." She nodded. They buried the men under the hill, marked them with stones, not out of mercy, but because the land deserved better than forgotten blood. The following spring, a new fence went up. A new roof, stronger beams, stone foundation. The girls returned, one by one. Jack taught them to ride better, shoot straighter. They taught him to laugh again. The West never gave peace, but this time, he'd carved a piece of it for himself. He stood on the porch one evening, Naeli beside him, watching the sun melt into the hills. "You ever think it'd be like this?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, but I hoped." Behind them, voices rose in song. The girls, the fire, life. Jack Carver thought he'd buried his heart. Turns out it had been waiting for fire, for fury, for family. And now, at last, it beat again. Not for war, but for what came after.